Hey to you everyone. In this video we will be covering how you can handle an open API source and handle it in your folder. We're gonna be handling this data in our backend, processes in our backend, and then send specific parameters to the front end and display it. The example we're gonna be working on with today is with this website. It's an open API website, and there's a lot of open API websites, not only this one. You can also find something like the dog API. There is this one that we're going to be using. It's about a cat API that gives you random images and description of cats that you can use. So we're just going to be covering how you can handle all of this data that will be fetched from this website, from this open API, and to send um, whatever we want, pretty much, that being the images, the description, whatever we want to the front end. This will be similar to if you'd be working with a uh, like a data structure. You can pretty much do the same. If you're working with a database, it's just with this one, it'll be, you know, good for practices. You can just do this with any other OpenAPI source. So let's just get started. So our project will consist of the following. We will use the data displayed in this OpenAPI, which is this. We have an ID. We have a URL that displays an image of an image of a random cat, sorry. And we have the width, the height, and the breed, and the favorites, and also other stuff. We will also be covering the query parameters. We will talk about the limits in the page. You can, of course, do the same with the others as a practice to enhance your knowledge about handling query parameters. We will be using Express and React to handle both the server side and the display um, on the customers, or sorry, on the user's interface. So I already created the projects in a separate folder called the tutorial one. This is just in case we're gonna have to take the CSS, because I do not plan to rewrite CSS, rather just take it. That could be a pain. So let's just get started into coding. So first of all, before we even start, I need to emphasize on how this website works. So first of all, you're gonna be provided by an API key, and I want to go around this API key um, word. Like in a lot of projects, you're gonna notice that you need an API key to use a service. In Stripe, it happens to in like payment services. You have an API key that will get, let's just say, a code for payments from the customer to your backend, because in payments we do not really accept the payment details. We do not store payment details, rather take a code that is exchanged through this API key, and that lets us handle data more securely rather than just taking it away, which is against the law. So let's just start with setting up our folder. You can just create a folder in your desktop. I called it tutorial 2. You can call it whatever you want. In this folder, we will create two other folders. We'll create UI for the interface or for the front end, and we will create the backend for the backend. Let's start by setting up our let's start by setting up our front end. I am gonna run a new terminal and redirect it to tutorial 2. What I suggest is also splitting your terminal into two. That way you will see the one for the backend and the other one for your front end. So sorry. So we'll have this one for the backend, and for this one, we'll just create the React boiler template. It goes like this. So you do npm. Of course, I'm assuming you have already downloaded the Node packages or the Node on your Windows. If you're using Mac, sorry, I do not use Mac. I have to figure that one out on yourself, but it's okay. So latest, vit at latest. There's of course more details on the official node, or sorry, the official React documentation webpage. You can go through every command that you need to set up your boilerplate or your React project. So the directory that we want is ads, which is UI in my case, and simply do the template of React. That will just create folders that we will use. That should be it. Oops, looks like we have a problem. Oh, it's npm create. I can never remember this. So npm creates beats at latest. And okay. Templates and React. Okay, now it should work. Confirm the name of the package. You choose React. I'm using JavaScript. You can use TypeScript if you want. And there you go. Should be it. And of course, we cd to the UI. Our folder, of course, it's the UI. And we run npm install to finish, or to get the .log.js in the package, to pretty much get the dependencies. So that's gonna take time depending on your computer. Perfect. Now for the backend. Oops. So we're finished with the front end. We're gonna go to the backend and do the same thing, except that this time we're gonna be working with Express, so we'll be setting up our Express. So let's just do npm init y. That should create the package JSON folder. And let's do npm I express. Install Express. Let's also install nodemon. We'll be using nodemon as well. And finally, that should be it. We will be installing cores as well, so why not do it now? I'll speak about cores while we do the project. It's pretty much security protocol that's like allows you to block domains from accessing your websites, and vice versa, of course, if you want to open your domain to all devices. I would highly suggest installing cores and including it in your projects if your ports in the front end and the back end are different. So I believe we have everything ready. One more thing, I need to talk also about the model syntax I'm gonna be using. So that should be type, and I'll talk more about it as we move on. So there's pretty much two syntaxes you can work on. Either you can use the common.js or the model for the ES6, and that's the one I prefer because it's similar to the front end and it's pretty much easier. Also, we're gonna set our div because we do not want to continuously run our server, rather have it refresh itself. So it's gonna be node with the new refresh feature. I believe it was included recently. So you just add node watch in this in here in the div that you created, and you put the name of your like server, or like where you're gonna be working. If you have routes, you're gonna put routes, but I would suggest that you put server because that's gonna be the main folder you're gonna be working on. Other stuff could be just a middleware or routes that you can handle on other routes you can handle on other files. Makes your code less chunky. So server.js, and that should be it. I will also speak about two more things before we continue. First one being the .env and the .gitignore. These are quite important because when you're trying to host your website, you do not want to put your environment variables into the GitHub or the Vercel. If you're trying to use a GitHub or Vercel hosting service, you definitely do not want to share your API key, or let's just say you're working with payments. You definitely do not want to do that. So how do you conceal those? Like, how does it work? Well, to do that, you just create a .env file. and the dots gets ignored. So in this .env, this is where your variable is gonna be. This is where you're gonna put, for an example, let's just put port here, 8080, just for a learning purpose. We're gonna include the ports, and of course we're gonna have our API key that I'm gonna talk about in a moment. So in our OpenAPI websites, if you do not use the API key provided by the website, you are only gonna be able to have limited access. You're just gonna have the ability to post one image. And I highly suggest to go through this documentation because it explains more about this. But the way it goes is you need to include your API key into your code, especially into the headers when you're trying to work with the server response. And we're gonna talk about this more in a moment. So now, so how you get this API key? It's given by the website. When you log in first time, it's given by the website. I'm not gonna show it in the video because it is a secret key that you keep between you and yourself. So in here, we're gonna, in the dots get ignore, we put anything that we do not want to show. So we do not want to show the .env, and we do not want to show our node. I mean, it's okay, but like you don't really need to put your node models in. It's just not necessary. So these two are pretty much what we don't want to show. Gonna save for both. Now we can get started. Let me just save our package JSON here. And yes, I forgot to add one more thing. We should, of course, add the .env, and the way you do that is by doing --env -file equals .env. Sorry, equals .env. So this is just to make sure you are adding your .env in your JSON, and you want to do that. Okay, so let's get started. So first of all, since we're working with Express, it's safe to say we're just gonna import Express from, and I'm gonna assume that you have some knowledge from some basic understanding of the ES6 models. It's similar to when you work with React. So it's similar to when you import in React. It works like that. So I may use the path, so I'm gonna import it from, from path. And then, so this is the easy part about Express, as opposed to Node. You can simply just put a const, name it app, equal to Express. That's it. You're done. You are done. And in plain Node.js, you will do the following. You will first import your HTTP from HTTP, and you'd import create server. It's a lot. From HTTP, you'd come here and then you would do const server equals create server. Create server. And then you'd put your routes here, request and response, and when you how you handle the way you handle requests is this: you check with an F, and it's pretty much from scratch. Like, let's say you want to handle a get method, you're gonna put the if request dot URL is equal to a specific URL. But sorry, this is not in here. I'm used to Express now. You would put this, and then you check for the URL. It's an endpoint you'd get from somewhere, and you check also for the request dot method, and you check if it's equal to get, put, or whatever you want, and then you put then you put your chunk of code here. If you're working with asynchronous, you just await the response, and then you try catch your errors. With Express is much easier. It suffices to just do app dot get. That's it. That's it. You have your route here and you have your request response here. It's so simple. That's why it's really good to, it's okay to understand the basics of Node before jumping into Express. That's actually a good idea. But it doesn't hurt to, just read about Node and how it works. Of course, there's good practices of Node, there's good practices of Express. Now, moving on. So in our case here, we are gonna be getting the provided URL from the API. Think of it as a bridge, okay? Your bridge um is the data that's provided by a source, okay? And you're just absorbing it in your code, okay? You're just taking it. It's like taking something. So we will define our own endpoint here. So let me just call it cat slash images. And what we will do is we will pretty much just const. We will define a response and we will fetch. You can use Axios if you want, but I just prefer using fetch. Backticks because I recommend using backticks in not only in the fetch. Whenever you're trying to use a string, I highly suggest you use backticks um instead of the single quotes. It's much better because that way you're gonna be able to include a variable into your string very easily instead of doing, let's just say as an example, console.log, and then you're trying to do this, and then you do plus, and then you will include the variable a. It's just not, it's okay to use, but it's just a lot of work as opposed to doing console.log and you backtick it a string, and you just, okay, so this is the trigger part. Instead of doing plus, you just do a $sign and curly braces, and then you put your variable here. It's much more practical, and I would highly suggest that you use this approach. So in here we are gonna fetch our beloved provided link. This is the link we're gonna be using. So we're just gonna paste this here. So what's happening is we are fetching the data from this website. We're fetching all of this array of objects. We're fetching all of these information. And there's a lot more than just one. There is like a lot. The website contains hundreds of pictures and other data that you can use. So after getting the response, we are gonna get, or we are gonna define the following const, call it data if you want, and that would be equal to, oh yeah, of course, I forgot to mention one important detail here. You want to work with async. I am not gonna go through the async and the promises in the asynchronous functions. I would highly suggest that you go through those before continuing the following video. So pretty much what this lets us do, of course, we gotta wait for our fish before we do anything. Gotta make sure we're waiting for the fetch. Of course, forgot to do try catch. I'm gonna do that there. I'm gonna start. Okay. So this is the syntax to pretty much have an asynchronous. It's like more working with promises. It's just instead of using promises, we use the async await. We do try catch to run our block of code and we catch our errors. Catch errors, what does it mean? It means that we work on customizing our errors. So in case like the user runs into a problem, or he inputs something that is against an if statement, just as an example, there is an error that's going to appear on the display. So usually I just do the following error handling by doing response dot status. It's a 400, and I also suggest that you go through the statuses. I could cover all of these small keys in the future, but each status has its own like HTTP statuses has their own meaning. There's 200 for OK, 400 for error, and goes like that. So we'll just display a JSON for an error. Just do message and just do a string. An error has occurred. It's that simple. Perfect. So now in our data, what we're gonna do is pretty much gets the URL of the images. We just want to work with the images. We do not want to work with other data, because as you can see here, we have the ID, the URL, the width, the breeds, etc. But we just want the images. We're just gonna access this particular parameter in the objects of arrays. Sorry, array of objects. The way you do that is you do data and you append the response that you are all to it. Okay, this response contains all of this. This is the response, and you can customize this as you want. The response will be an array full of multiple objects. It couldn't be just one, it's going to be actually a lot of them. So it's going to be not only one, like it's going to be so much. It's just going to be a lot, and we can access whatever objects we want and whatever property we want or data we want from that. Perfect. So after we define this, we will just, oh yeah, of course, we need to wait for this too. Of course, we have to wait for the fetch to happen, and we have to wait also for this to be appended to the data. That's crucial. Good. Okay, so now there's one more thing I will cover before I end the video. Before we move on into getting them or sending the data to the front end, that will be made in another video. I'm gonna talk quickly about query parameters. So pretty much, you can read more about them in the documentation, but we'll be using the limits in the page. So we have two query parameters here that we're gonna be using. First one is the limit, and that means how many images do we want. Okay, and we have the page. Think of it as like when you browse Google and like you go down like to the bottom of Google, there's like multiple numbers here that you go through. Those are the query, like the page query params. And that's exactly what we're gonna be doing here, because in our project we are gonna be moving through pages, and each page is gonna have like a limited number of images. This is what we're trying to do here. So the way it goes is as follows. We are gonna define two query parameters. First one being the limit, and that will be appended as such. It's implemented within the request. So request dot query and then dot limit. And of course, I would like it to be an integer, so we would parse int it. As follows. We will do the same thing with page, because we're working with two query params. I will be covering those more in a future video. I will just dedicate one video to just the query params, because it's quite a concept that's a lot to talk about, but I'm just gonna try to get the basics going on here. So we have page and we have page here. Now, what I want um, to mention is you have to implement these two. You have to implement these two query params in the fetched URL. Okay, so how, like, what does this mean? This means that when you are getting data from your API, you are getting a specific param. Okay, like, think of it this way: the API gives you enormous amount of images. It gives you like 100 images. It gives you more, even more. You setting up the limits and implementing it in this URL gives you just what you need. Let's say I just want 10 images. I'm just gonna put limit to 10. I just want 2 pages. I'm gonna put the page to 2. How do we do that? It's as follows. There's always before you implement the query parameters, there's always a question mark that's like it tells us that we are working with a query, and this also works on searching. When you're trying to code a search bar, you implement this concept of queries. Okay, so the customer is able to filter what they need. In our case, we're gonna just filter the limit in the page, so it will be limit equals. This is why I mentioned working with backticks is good, because now we can just do this. Dollar, always, it's always like this, always a dollar sign, curly braces. And we're gonna set up our limits here. Next, we're gonna add the page, so we're gonna do end page equal to page. Same thing with page. Okay, perfect. So now we have added them into the fetched link. But of course, I need to mention one important detail is in here. When you set up the limit, okay, when you set up the limit query, I would advise to set up a default value in case the customer doesn't put, or the user doesn't put a limit in their search. You will put like a default value. I choose 10. You can choose whatever you want. Same for pages. This one is a little bit different because you want at least one page. If the user tries to choose a 0, we'll simply show nothing. Just handle that as a null. So let's just keep it at 1. And just to make the video not too long, we're gonna try to use Postman to just check for the response of this code. So now we're pretty much gonna check on the limits provided. Make sure that it's a number, because the user can put whatever he wants. We gotta make sure that he's putting a limit that's a number. How do we do that? Gonna use an if and make sure. There's 2 ways to go about this, but I would suggest using the nan. So make sure that is nan. Make sure that the limit is a number. So let me explain this line. Usually we have is nan is not a number, meaning that limit is not a number. We're checking if the limit is not a number, but that's not the case. We want to check if it's a number. Hence, using this exclamation mark at the beginning to make sure that we are doing the opposite. That's the first checking we're gonna do. The second is we're gonna make sure that the limit is not 0. Okay, we do not want a 0 as a limit. Also, we're gonna check. We're gonna do the same for the page. The page is always gonna be a number. And the page should not be should be at least should also be superior than 0. Can just have a 0 as a page. Perfect. Okay, 2 things we're gonna do here. So now what happens is the user comes in, puts his limit. Okay, User comes in, says, okay, I just want to see 10 images. So we're gonna, of course, by the way, we can handle the limits. I'll show how to handle the user input. That's just front end side. It's pretty much just handling logic in the front end. We're just gonna use the limit as our parameter to handle how much the user is inputting. So now the user puts a limit. Okay, he puts, let's say, 11. We check. What happens in the code is we check if 11 is a number. Is it a number? Yes. Is it superior than 0? He didn't put 0. Yes. Okay, good. Here's what we're gonna do. The data that we have, okay, we're gonna display only the number the user had in, like, used. User gave us 5. We're just gonna display 5 images. How do we do that? So let's just define a const. Let's just call it limited images. Okay. And we're gonna do data. Okay. The data that we're working on, it's the one here. And we are gonna do dot slice. And what does this dot slice do? It's pretty much shows an array. It takes the starting parameter and the ending parameter. In our case, it's gonna be limit. So what this is gonna do is gonna slice our array into a limited amount of elements that goes from the first element to the limit, which is what the user had used in our website. Okay. The second, or sorry, yeah, that should be it. We should just use, that should be about it. Yeah, actually, we should also, I should also cover another thing. So since we want only images to be displayed, we're gonna do const of images equal to data.map. Again, I'm gonna assume you have a knowledge of JavaScript, and I'm gonna map through each element and display. Sorry, we're gonna map through each element. Let's just call it image, and we just want the URL. Okay, this is how we get only the URL. Like, because you need to understand the data in here is an array of objects. Okay, it's an array of objects. We should first access each object, and then we access the parameter of the that we want. In our case is URL, and this is what we're gonna do here. We're gonna access only the URL. Perfect. So now we're gonna have our response dot status of 200, which means okay dot JSON. We're gonna display a JSON in our Postman just to check. And we're gonna display multiple elements. So just a quick mark here, the response is what we're passing to the front end. This is what we're replying with in the front end. Okay, so we are gonna first input or pass the limit. We're gonna pass the pages, and we're gonna pass images. That should be it. This is all we're gonna need. We're gonna pass images, limit, in the page. Okay, perfect. This is now just for good measure. We're gonna test this code in Postman, make sure that we are actually getting a response. Yeah, we forgot to do one more thing here. It's having our server listening in on a port, so app.listen. So we already have our ports. Did we actually? We did not. Okay, so this is a good time to talk about including the ports from the d.env. So we're gonna do const. We call this port, and it's gonna be process dot env dot the name of the variable we pass into our env file. Okay, because in here we passed 8080. Perfect. So if not, we're just gonna set the default as 8080. So port, and let's just do a response dot status of 200 and um JSON like let's not do a JSON, let's just console log it for simplicity. Don't need that JSON. Server running on port. Save that. PM run dev. Server running perfect. Okay, now we just with Postman, and I highly suggest that you install the extension of Postman. I keep calling it Postman. So the reason you want to do this is because this is a great tool to test your websites. Like, let's say you don't want to deal with the front end yet, and you just want to test the back end responses. This is how you do it. You come, create a new HTTP request. You pass your, in your case, it's gonna be local host. Okay, it's gonna be like this. But since we defined previously our routing here, we're just gonna add it in here. Okay, so this is the route we have handled, like we have added. And of course, don't forget that the method is a get. So in here, I'm gonna choose get. Of course, I'm gonna be covering Postman in another video, but for now, let's just try to use it to display our backend. Okay. Oh, yeah, of course. We haven't implemented our API key. Let me just do that. I'm gonna have to pause the video to implement my API key because I don't wanna edit it out. I just wanna keep the video in a one string. The way you do that is the fetch method takes a second parameter and you pass this in the headers. So your headers are gonna have it's provided by the website, so it's gonna have this, and you're gonna pass your API key here. So let me just pause real quick, add my API key, and get back. Of course, before we even do that, let me just do this. Const API key process .env .api key, because I'm gonna put it in the .env. Okay. All right. So I have just finished adding my API into the .env. There's one error I have noticed while working on this. It's the following. This is a JSON because we are getting a response in the form of a JSON element. Okay, perfect. This looks good. So let's just save it and run our server. Run dev, go to our Postman, and then we send our request. Okay, perfect. It is working. So as you can see, when we send a request, we have a display of 10 pictures. These are all pictures displayed and that we will handle on the front end. I will cover that in a new video because this one is already long, and we will go through how we can take this data in the front end and process it from there. For now, take care.